Welcome to the second in our series of Future Farm Resilience Fund podcasts from NIAB, working in conjunction with AKC and Savills. I'm your host, Will Vaughan-France, Regional Agronomist for the Southwest with NIAB, and today we're going to be talking about break crops, and I've been joined by our break crop specialist in NIAB, Colin Peters. Welcome, Colin.
Hello.
So we're going to have a bit of a chat about all things break crops, oilseed rape, and some of the alternatives. Perhaps one of the big challenges that a lot of growers are facing at the moment as they make cropping plans and decide how they're going to balance the rotation over the next 12 months. When you look back over the last 10 years, I suppose we've seen oilseed rape drop from about 740,000 hectares 10 years ago to somewhere between 300 and 400 now. So we've seen a big reduction, but we keep persisting in trying to do it. And perhaps, Colin, could you just give us perhaps a flavour of how you see the challenges with oilseed rape and why we keep persisting against some of these challenges?
Obviously, the biggest challenge is the cabbage stem flea beetle issue. And I think the reason why we're so keen to try and find a way around this problem is the fact that it's such a fit for the UK arable rotation from a cultivation perspective, from the fact that it is a really, really good break crop, giving a really good entry for a first cereal. It fits with the labour profile. It fits, it ticks so many boxes, which is why it was our favourite crop for 30 odd years. I can remember when it was introduced when I was very little, which was a very, very long time ago. And everyone was amazed what a difference it made to the rotation. So there are big challenges. There's a lot of work going on to try and find ways to make it more reliable. We're not going to cure the flea beetle problem. NIAB are working hard with DEFRA funding. DEFRA have been really good in helping us out over the last couple of years. And we think we are making a bit of progress on understanding how we might affect the numbers, but there's also a lot of work done by our colleagues in AHDB, ADAS, etc., on different projects looking at ways that you can try and make your crop a little bit more reliable. But this is quite a recent problem, and so we're still trying to understand the actual behaviour of the pest in the wider landscape, because we know a little bit about the life cycle. What we don't really understand is how it works in the wider environment. And working with a lot of farmers and bringing in a lot of anecdotal information, as well as the trial work we're doing, we are starting to make progress on how to make it a bit more reliable.
So, I mean, it's around about 7-8 years now since neonicotinoids went. I mean, this is a challenge we've been dealing with for a few years. That obviously happened also on continental Europe as well. Is this a UK problem, or is this a problem that is just as big an issue in Denmark, in Germany, in northern France, in other big oilseed rape growing regions that are local to us?
It's less of a problem the colder it gets, the further away you get, which seems to be part of the issue. And we're still trying to understand how that works. But certainly it's, as we all know, in central England, it is a huge problem. Last year, we were getting close to 400 adults a square metre coming out of the ground. And when you actually say that gives you a sort of a hint as to like how big the problem is.
So that's kind of 8 per plant sort of territory, isn't it?
That's plenty per cotyledon, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we do need to understand how we can actually affect that population from within an IPM strategy. We are playing around, as many people will know, with different cultivation techniques and trying to understand the pupae and adult situation in the surface of the soil. We've made quite a lot of progress over the last 18 months, and we have been reducing the number of adults emerging from the soil by different cultivations soon after harvest, where we appear to be affecting the pupae. Early days, and we're doing a lot of soil sampling and trying to understand exactly what's going on at the moment, together with our colleagues at East Malling. And for those growers who have been involved, they're being kept up to date with what we're learning. Early results this year show that is still the case, even though we're in a later harvest window, as we all know. So we weren't quite sure how that's all going to work this year, but we have early indications from emergence traps are showing that where we've cultivated, we have very significantly reduced the numbers of adults coming out of the ground.
So one of the things I've often been quite keen to do with oilseed rape stubbles on my own farm and when advising others as well is actually not do anything straight after harvest. Leave seed on the surface, allow volunteers to break dormancy, particularly if the soil's dry, so you don't put them straight, and to prevent volunteer problems building in the future. Because I've seen too many crops where 50 seeds are sown and you've got 80 plants, and you wonder how that happens. That perhaps maybe now the wrong thing to do from the point of cabbage stem flea beetle. Maybe we're better to put a 5 centimetre sort of disc cultivation or very shallow tine cultivation through to tickle that surface. Would that be something that we would be better to do, you think?
We other really old people like John Cousins will remember the original advice.
I'm sure he'll take that as a compliment, Colin.
He will. So I used to work with John when we used to work with Peter Lutman, who was the first, we think was the first person who said, don't cultivate your rape stubbles. And this was relating to the dormancy of oilseed rape if it was buried. And we think that's where it came from. And we don't actually think that that advice was generated by leave it as a trap crop for the flea beetle, because flea beetle wasn't a problem then. So we need to revisit that understanding. But what we are finding is, and we're soil sampling at different depths in different fields and have been doing for the last 5 weeks before harvest. And we now know that the majority of the pupae are in the top 30 odd mil. So we're suggesting that whatever we're finding out is best done cultivating as shallow as possible. Where we've done that over the last couple of years, we haven't actually seen a difference in volunteer numbers 6-8 weeks later, because you're doing it very quickly. And we think if we go shallow enough, that's not necessarily going to cause the problems that we thought existed in those days. But it's still something we need to revisit. We also need to revisit what the difference might be parasitoids wise if we cultivate straight after harvest, as opposed to when we might more generally do it 6, 8, 10 weeks later. So that's further work.
One of those sort of challenges that comes in with all things in biology, that you can do one thing in good faith and get caught by something else instead. Not everyone has had a significant problem with cabbage stem flea beetle on their farms yet. Not to the point of limiting their crops, but probably it's perhaps feared by almost ubiquitously across the country. But just reviewing this harvest we've just had, what are your thoughts on how crops have performed in different regions of the UK? Because it's not just cabbage stem flea beetle. We've also had issues to do with some quite unusual weather patterns. I think all weather patterns seem to be unusual now, but fairly unusual weather patterns. And whilst we had relatively little disease set in, other than perhaps things like club root, crops have had a tough time, and we've seen other significant insect pests for some, like winter stem weevil as well. So what's your perspective of how the crops really performed this year, and how do you think that'll affect people's willingness to drill this autumn?
So if I may comment on club root, where I get very worried that you talk to a lot of farmers at places like cereals. Rape got to £700 a tonne. Marvellous, we're going to drill loads more rape. How are you going to do that? I'm going to shorten the rotation. Okay, so what are you going to do? I'm going to use a club root variety, because we've now got lots of club root varieties out there that are very good. True, but they all rely on one gene. When that gene goes, there will be no club root varieties left. So we urge people to only use club root varieties where they know they need them. So that's that thing.
Yes, and I mean, apart from anything else, most of them they still have some element of performance drag, and some soils are just not that suited to club root anyway. If you've got a club root problem, you probably already know about it.
Yes, yeah, and it's actually quite easy to test. You can actually do the test yourself, really, by growing varieties and that, in trays from that field the year before. So around the country, the stem larvae numbers that we've looked at over the last 2 or 3 years, the east of the country, so we're looking at 2022 to 2023, the east of the country we know had a lot less cabbage stem flea beetle available in 2022 autumn. So they appear to have yielded quite well. We lost a lot of crops in the centre of the country. So I'm talking Cambridgeshire, Hertfordshire and around there, and South Suffolk, because we got much colder temperatures on 2 occasions than we used to. I lost all my trial sites in Cambridgeshire in February, where we were getting in Cambridgeshire down to -17 several nights on the trot, and that went on for quite a while, and that did finish them off. But the southwest, we've got very variable yields in the southwest. Some are very good, some are very bad. It's early days for us to bottom that out.
As a resident of the southwest, I would concur with that. Somerset, a lot of 3 tonne a hectare, 3.5. Cornwall, more 4 to 5 tonne a hectare. Not noted as a big oilseed rape growing region, of course, but
nope. But what we have seen is a lot of the adult or a lot of flea beetle have migrated to North Wales. So we had very high stem larvae numbers in the spring of the winter of 2022 into 2023. So we're still sort of trying to understand that. It's meant that our trial sites in places like Telford are no longer much use to us, whereas only 3 or 4 years ago they were absolutely fine.
Place, weren't they, to go?
They were the safe place, yes, and they're not anymore.
So when we look at, we probably ought to have a little bit of a chat about some of the other break crops as well, because I mean, there's a few little hints of some things to consider on oilseed rape, particularly around cultivations post-crop, that might help. But I think many of the other key things around success, good quality seed beds, moisture availability, etc., are things that are probably fairly well rehearsed. But within the alternative sort of break crop segment, where do you see the greatest opportunities coming there? We've already got a more diverse break crop background, and we had forage maize, for example, is a significantly greater area than it would have been 10 years ago. Oats have perhaps increased in area, but what are the ones you'd be interested in for the future?
I think the exciting areas are, I mean, there's a lot of things that people don't often think about, like herbage seed. So we're seeing quite a few people have moved out of oilseed rape into herbage seed. Herbage seed fits with our sort of thoughts on regen farming and slightly, being different in those respects. There's quite a lot of areas in the centre of the country now where herbage is being grown by contractors that will take it away, barn dry it, and sell it for a fortune in places like Newmarket. So there are these types of things there. But there's a whole range of other crops that DEFRA are really trying to sort of push forward. NIAB have recently got involved in quite a large chickpea breeding project. So we've got quite a lot of chickpeas in the ground at the moment. We're looking at those from a whole range of, they almost could be an animal feed type thing or the proper chickpea market, because if you think about chickpeas, a lot of them are harvested a long way away. They then move around the planet, then they're rehydrated and put in a tin. Doesn't make any sense. They're the types of things that we're looking at as to, can we actually get them growing in the UK, certainly in the south of the UK, because they're not far off the coast in northern France. We did, as you'll be aware, we did a very large review for DEFRA on underutilised crops, which covered a whole range of things, and it's very easy to find. If you just Google DEFRA underutilised crops, you get the whole 389-page report. I just scanned to the summary.
There is a summary, isn't there, as well? For those,
yeah, I was going to say I'd go
yeah.
for the summary. But within that, hemp. Hemp might sound a bit out there, but when you actually look at the potential of hemp and the fact that the Netherlands have removed all restrictions on it, we came up with thousands of different uses for hemp. It's being called for in a whole range of manufacturing processes, from houses to aeroplanes to all sorts of bits and pieces.
Sustainable fibre. I mean,
it's absolutely
the sustainability agenda if the supply chain was in place to develop it. I mean, I say supply chain. I mean, is that one of the barriers behind it, as well as the legislation, or is it just down to the restrictions?
We were quite surprised at how big the supply chain already exists, but they're having to import it from various places to use it, to proof of concept type thing. So if we went back to where, if Henry VIII was still king, it was compulsory, you had to grow hemp for the Armada. But those types of crops do exist.
I hadn't, amongst the various things that Henry VIII achieved in our modern culture that still hang around today, I hadn't realised that hemp was one of them.
Oh yes. It's so we've also got a lot of breeding work going on with pulses. So a lot of us would automatically go to peas and beans if we're moving away from oilseed rape, and obviously the acreage is increasing, and there's a lot of work and effort being put into, as we all know, are we going to move to a more pulse-led diet in the future, which is why the chickpea type thing comes in. And there's a lot of effort being put into trying to understand how we can do more with beans and peas, because they're not delivering in a sustainable and reliable way that we want them to in the longer run. So understanding the genetics of those is a big effort that's going on. And there's if they're not familiar with them, there's quite a range of pea varieties out there now that you can cherry pick markets. And for the more interested people, the human consumption side of peas, there's quite a lot you can do. And if you borage and all these types of crops, they are out there, they do exist, and they're worth exploring. There's a whole range of people within NIAB and with outside of NIAB that are developing these crops quite successfully. They're not just a pie in the sky type thing. I mean, I can remember 25 years ago, evening primrose, so we all grew lots of weeds,
yes,
type thing. But those types of things are out there, and that underutilized crops review, we did come up with some quite interesting stuff. And even if you take things like linseed, so winter linseed is gaining ground. There's quite a lot of interest at the moment in growing winter linseed a lot further north than we're familiar with. It performed very well in 21-22, very north, which a lot of people wouldn't expect it to do so. And linseed is a crop.
These crops, and linseed is one. I mean, they all have challenges as well, don't they? I mean, it's not like there's some sort of panacea of an easy time. And so I'm going to throw a slightly curved ball into the conversation as we come towards sort of the end. Is our idea of a break crop actually slightly flawed? And if you're starting to think about the role of, for example, companion cropping, the way that some stewardship options might come in, cover cropping over winter, are we thinking about breaks in a sort of slightly too narrow sense? Should we be thinking broader about, for example, could you grow continuous wheat if you had a continuous clover understory? If you had diverse cover crops from September through to March, and could you then actually grow continuous spring barley for malting on some soils, and actually effectively get your break crop sort of within the crop year, as well as your profit driver crop? Are there other ways of doing this?
I think you're totally right. I long since stopped thinking about the crops we grow as monocrops, and that there is potential for doing a whole range of other bits and pieces. The whole cover crop, companion crop, however you want to describe it, is a really exciting situation for livestock farmers and arable farmers. And I think you're right. There's a whole new way of thinking about how we actually drag stuff out of the atmosphere, improve the soil condition, and try and manipulate what we learn from different crops and how we can actually get those to help each other. So crop equivalents, where you might grow two things and try and get the equivalent of more than half of each other.
1.5 or something, yeah.
Yeah,
It's a productivity gain in a simple sense.
It is. And we've got to stop thinking in the same way that we might have thought 20, 30 years ago, where we just sort of plough stuff, let it overwinter, plant something in the spring and harvest it. Those days are gone. We need to think a lot more not necessarily outside the box, because there's a lot of stuff in the box that we have a good knowledge of, and we're learning fast. So you're right, the whole break crop thing isn't necessarily where a particular crop sits in the rotation. It's how you use a range of different crops within the rotation, and they may actually be together at the same time, but we need to understand what that means. So if we've got bits of brassicas in something to do with a cover crop, that oilseed rape is a club root issues. So there's a whole range of different bits and pieces there to go. But yeah, really exciting times. And it's that sort of standing back and trying to get a bigger picture as to how we can make best use of the whole range of tools we've got available.
Colin, I think that's great. Listeners, if there are crops you're thinking about, do get in touch with us, because there may well be there's a lot of work going on within NIAB looking at some of these specialist crops. There's a lot of knowledge that exists. So if you are taking part in the Future Farming Farm Resilience Fund work that we're delivering, then I'm sure there are specialists who might be able to help, and there may be ways to engage on some of the work as well where things are being tried and tested. So do get in touch if anything is of interest. Colin, thank you very much as ever for joining us.
Good fun. And, as you say, if anyone's got any questions, do get in touch.
And we look forward to the next podcast. So thank you very much.